Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to this Feng Shui Society webinar. My name's Gina Lazenby. I'm the chair of the Feng Shui Society. We have a very special evening tonight. We have Dr. Peter Merry, who's joining us, and he's going to talk about something weird, some technologies. And also, it's a little bit different because these technologies are very new, and there's an opportunity for us in the field that we're in, which is energy and space, in learning more about these machines that actually help us measure space. That's what he's going to talk about. Peter is the co-founder and managing director at Ubiquity University. You may have heard of that. It's a global university involved in inner and outer regeneration. He's also the co-founder and the CEO of the Wyrd Experience, that's spelled with a Y, Wyrd Experience and Wyrd Technologies, and that's what we're focusing on tonight. He's the author of 4 books: Evolutionary Leadership, Why Work, and Designing Work for People and the Planet, Leading from the Field. And, you know, this work that Peter's going to talk about is something that, if you know Lynn McTaggart and her books, particularly The Field, where she put on the map really and alerted the world to technologies that would show that something was happening in space. That's his 3rd book. And Volution. He's also one of the world's top experts in transformative leadership, working with organizations and governments, and a recognized expert in the field of future-proof learning, science and consciousness, and integral leadership. And he's the founder and host of the Science and Consciousness Summit, and that's in its 4th year, coming up this November. I've been to the other 3, the launch event back in 2021. Lynn McTaggart was there, and this is where those weird technologies were launched or relaunched, and that's what Peter's going to talk about. And this Science and Consciousness Summit is interesting because it's bringing together scientists, researchers, people involved in parapsychology, academics, physicists, with lay people, with healers, with people with an interest in the invisible world, whether they're working professionally or not. And it's not just a conference, it's a community that's building. It's a very fascinating space. Last year, Peter designed the conversation around time and the non-linear nature of time. This year, it's about space, which is about the energy, which is what Feng Shui is about. And so we thought it'd be a brilliant idea if Peter came along and told us something about the technologies, because there's an opportunity for us to be involved in collaborating and trying out some of these and giving feedback. So, Peter, if we were in a room, we would be applauding, but we're going to wave at you and welcome you to our space. Thank you, Peter. I'm handing over to you.
All right. Thank you, Gina, and lovely to be here. What I expect is a group of people whom I don't have to convince of the existence of energy and space, which is great because that's not always the case. Tomorrow, Friday, I have a room full of leaders who are a bit more rationally inclined, and so we have to go into the science a bit more to help them get there. But I'm gonna share with you a bit of the story of how we ended up with Wyrd Experience and the technologies, which itself is a story full of synchronicities, as you know, these things often are when you're in this domain of work. I've noticed, and as Margaret Wheatley, who was one of my mentors early on, said, just follow the synchronicities and you'll be fine. So far so good. So let me share a screen here, tell a little bit of a story, and then we'll just open it up for questions, discussion, and see where we go. So I won't keep it too long. I'll imagine that you're all in a very hot room like me at the moment and probably can't concentrate for too long. So yeah, so Gina mentioned Lynn McTaggart, and this is where Lynn McTaggart's book, The Field, is where I first heard about this work. And some of you may have heard of it, but I will tell the story. So in the 1970s, McDonnell, the aircraft makers, came to the School of Engineering at Princeton University with a rather intriguing question and said, I know this kind of sounds a bit strange, but it seems like the pilots, when they're in the fighter aircraft, fighter pilots, when they get stressed, they seem to be influencing the instruments on the dashboard of the aircraft. Is there anything that you can help us with there? Now, that was kind of, an unusual question for them to have to face. And Robert Jahn, who you can see on the left in the picture here, he is the Dean of the School of Engineering at Princeton. But and although he was pretty skeptical about all of this, he was a good scientist. And so he followed the data. And he's actually got some students to do a kind of student project to do some initial exploration. And when the data came back with enough evidence that something was going on, then he decided to pursue it, which, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is unlike many of the so-called scientists today, who, if it doesn't fit their worldview, would rather just say it can't be possibly true and move on without the curiosity that a real scientist has when the data seem to be pointing to something that actually is not explainable by their current paradigm or worldview. So this started what ended up being 28 years of research at Princeton School of Engineering, and they called it the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. Anomalies because they couldn't explain them according to the current science. So that got, shrunk down into PAIR. The PAIR lab is what it became known as. And pretty soon, Bob realized that much as a good rocket scientist that he wasn't much of a people person and would need a psychologist to help him run the lab and all the experiments that they wanted to do. Because essentially they were going to have to explore how human intention and people's inner state affects the world around them. Because that seemed to be what was happening with the aircraft. And so he found Brenda Dunn, who was a psychologist. Again, it was a very synchronous story. And they ended up working for many years together at the PAIR lab. And what they were really doing was to see whether people with intentions, just normal people, they steered away from people claiming to be psychics, whether they had influence on what should otherwise be purely random events according to normal science. And they started, for example, with a great big machine on the wall that 9,000 balls dropped through and ended up in a Gaussian curve at the bottom. And then people would sit in front of this machine and they would try to influence the balls falling more to the right or falling more to the left. And sure enough, people were able to do that. Not in a massive amount, but small amounts, but continually repeated, which gave it the statistical significance. So they built a couple of other mechanical devices, like a pendulum that people tried to influence, like a little fountain they tried to get people to influence. And then they moved on to the digital technology, which would enable them to run a lot more experiments and tests because of the speed with which the data repeated. And they built some of the very early random event generators, or random number generators, as they're sometimes called. And what these are very kind of fast coin flippers. So they generate ones and zeros very fast using a quantum tunneling effect, which means that according to current science, there is no way one could predict whether it was going to be a 1 or a 0. So it should be generating completely random data that nothing could be able to influence. There is no explanation in mainstream physics for how anything should be able to influence these random event generators. In the photo in the bottom left corner, you can see one of the early versions of this sitting next to the screen. They're now down to the size of a credit card or even a USB stick. So the technology has shrunk significantly, but basically does the same thing. So what they would do is have people try to move a line up or down the screen. So the screen you can see on the left. If the data was purely random, the line would run across the middle of the screen. And any deviation from that was a signal that something was influencing this device, which, as I said before, should be purely random in its output. And the parabolic curves there are the curves of statistical significance. So any line that goes outside of that curve has statistical significance. So they were able to run thousands and thousands of these trials with all sorts of people. And by the end of the 28 years, they had really proven beyond statistical doubt that human intention seems to influence the world around us. 1 in a billion is the chance that what they found was pure chance. So at the end of this DVD that Bob Jan has, talking about the 28 years, he finishes by saying, well, we've proven this beyond statistical doubt. Over to you to work out the conclusions and implications. And there he ends it. And that's kind of where we picked it up. So one of the other things that they found was when a group of people get together and have a shared focus and connection, that also seems to influence the data. So this is the way we have this technology set up originally. The Celeron device you can see there is one REG, one random event generator. And at Princeton, they were basically running one random event generator, and they were looking at the deviation from randomness. And that was their kind of statistical measurement. My colleague, Wolf, who was playing around really one day, stumbled across an effect that has had a big influence on the future development of the technology, where he found that when you had 2 of these devices in the same room with the same thing going on, they both seem to be generating the same pattern of data. So not only, were they showing deviation from randomness, but these 2 devices that should be completely independent to each other, according to normal science, are showing correlations. And that should never, there's no way one could explain that, unless, of course, you understand that a space is filled with energy and information. And anything that happens in that space is likely to be reflected in a set of random data that's basically white noise. So this is kind of what you get, is you get these 2 REGs generating data. You're looking at the deviation from randomness, and you're looking at correlations between the two REGs. So if it was just, an experiment where nothing was happening, a materialist in all cases would expect that you just get 2 completely random data streams, no particular deviation from random and no correlations between them. But firstly, this isn't what they found during the Princeton work. They found that people were able to significantly affect the randomness of the data by, for example, trying to move a line up a screen or down a screen purely with their intention, so with no physical connection between them and the device. And that groups, as they cohered, also created structure in the data. And one of the other things that they did, but they haven't documented that much, is that they took these devices to sacred sites. And they found that when they took the devices into a sacred site, it also affected the data. And that was one of the experiments I started to do many years ago, was to take it along to these sacred spaces and just bring it into the space. And maybe we do some ritual there, but just the fact of taking it into the space affected what should be the random data and brought some structure and coherence into the data. So Wolf, my colleague, for example, did some experiments taking it into churches. And the moment that you cross the threshold into the church, you get structure in the data. He compared it with just running it in a German hotel room in a city for a while, seeing what happened there, taking it into sacred sites, taking it up to the mountains, and noticing that you did get a different quality in the field in these different spaces, and that this device was actually tracking those differences. So just a little bit on the science for some of you who might be interested. There are a few channels of data that we're tracking. So we always have 2 REGs running. Channel 1 checks whether both REGs are flipping the same side of the coin at the same time. So that whether they're both doing 1s or they're both doing 0s at the same time. It also shows, are they flipping opposite to each other? So like one's doing 1 all the times and one's doing 0s all the time. So that's also a correlated pattern that you wouldn't expect that deviates from random. And the third is what they call the stick together effect that you can see on the third slide here, where you get the lines kind of just going along basically the same path together. And that third image there, if that was the Princeton research, they wouldn't have picked up or recorded any statistical significance because the lines are within the parabola. But because these two lines are sticking together along the pathway, so you've got these two completely independent REGs who are producing the same data at the same time in a space. Now that has statistical significance that you can't just get if you only use one REG. So this generates a graph, and just to give you one example here, this was from a Tantra ritual. So Wolf did a lot of his initial research in Tantra rituals in Berlin, followed the same ritual 9 times, different people, but same ritual. And the peak that you can see in the data here is from the moment where the main ritual comes to its peak. And so your tracking is, you see in the data a highly significant structure that is happening at exactly the same time that people report and that Wolf observes seeing the main part of the ritual culminating. And that's when it looks at the two lines, what it looks like when you look at the two lines. So they are correlated and they both go outside of the parabola curve of significance at the same time. So he's done that many, many times. And one of the interesting things is that we're starting to see some patterns in the kind of data path that is coming out. So it's almost as if that particular tantric ritual, for example, has an energetic or informational fingerprint to it. And that's something we want to explore further, is do we see kind of similarities in the data streams, for example, around the same piece of music or other kinds of rituals. We also have devices being used at the moment by Northampton University in football stadia, and they are tracking to see what happens to the data when something important happens during the match and the crowd responds. And up until now, in some of the early trials,
Aeropuerto de las Américas.
We see the correlation between the something happening during the football match and data on the device. So that's, apart from anything else, that's showing us that there is some kind of field. There must be some kind of field that is connecting the device to some kind of energy that's happening in the space of the football stadium or of the Tantra ritual, and that we're able to actually track that. So one of the interesting things when talking to Gina about the possibilities here is being able to take the device into a space that you're working on with Feng Shui, have it run, say, for the hour or so before you do anything, keep it running while you're doing your intervention, and then keep it running for a little time afterwards as well, and noticing at what point you get structure in the data. And if you did it enough, you might find that you get similar patterns through similar kinds of interventions. So imagine if a number of you were doing this research, you might find there's a particular Feng Shui intervention that you all decide to do the next time you do your work, and you all track the pattern of it. You might find that you start to see a particular energetic fingerprint of that kind of intervention. Now, we have no idea, so we would love to see people researching this. And of course, the nice thing is it provides some kind of scientific evidence of the impact of the interventions that we do, whether we're healers, Feng Shui practitioners, energy workers, more generally with space and land. And the fact that it's kind of got this 28 years of research at Princeton University School of Engineering kind of really helps people stay a little more open-minded if they're not already open to the possibilities of the kind of work that you and many of us do. Talking about patterns, so this was the same Tantra ritual done in November 2019 and July 2022. And you can see the similarity between the data streams here, what we call stick together effect as they come down screen towards the parabolic curve. And then you can see exactly the moment that the ritual ended, where the two blue arrows are. That's when the lines separate, come out of coherence and go back to their random patterns. So, you know, for that amount of time I mean, the statistical significance of this is massive. And so even you know, any open-minded scientist would want to be curious about this data, because there is, you know, no way it can be explained by current theories of physics. The one other area that we've been researching is the moment of death. We've been lucky enough to have a good contact in the intensive care units of a hospital and a region in Spain, and had the devices in the ICUs and correlated the data from the Wyrdoscope with the data from the EEGs in the moment of death. And every time there has been a peak in the Wyrdoscope data at the moment that the EEG records the person's passing. And so remember, there is no physical connection between this device and the people in the room. And it's so, you know, this with the scientists saying there's nothing in the world of physics that should be able to influence these devices, then by their own definition, what we must be seeing here is something non-physical happen at the moment of death. So it's kind of, in a way, scientific proof for something non-physical going on at the moment somebody dies. The one you can see in the middle there was a particularly high pattern in the data, you know, 1 in 200,000 of it happening by chance. And when we inquired about what was going on, this, by the way, was in a hospice in Scotland. Then they said, oh yeah, we all remember this guy because he refused medication and he wanted to die conscious. And that gave the biggest peak that we'd seen before. But what we were also curious about was that little peak 20 minutes before he passed away. And when we asked about that, they said, yes, that's when the dog left the room. So the dog obviously, you know, has some kind of sensing of what was coming and picked it up 20 minutes before the event actually happened. On the bottom line, you can also see that at the moment of this person's passing, the correlation ends between the data. So the coherence in the data finishes, the lines go back to their random patterns that one would expect. So just to show you the team here, who are kind of collection of scientists and researchers who've been involved in this, in the Oregano group, as they've kind of called themselves, and then we've been feeding this into the Wyrd research and the further development of the technology. And these are some of the ideas that we have for the future. For example, if we were able to analyze all the data that we're collecting, because at the moment we're only analyzing a very small amount of that, we expect we'd start to see some of the qualitative patterns in the data that we can't discern at the moment. So that might start to give us these fingerprints, as it were, of different kinds of events, different things that are going on, getting more granularity around the longer term process of dying, like different traditions have different practices at different moments. Like some would say the soul leaves the body, you know, a number of days after the death. So, you know, can we correlate the data against these different belief systems and see what they show us? Also in groups, a lot of people who are buying Wyrdoscopes are group facilitators, and they like to see how the field shifts based on the kinds of interventions that they do. and then next time try something different and see whether that makes a difference in the field data. We've also been doing some work with mediums, had 10 mediums doing their work together, and again picked up structure in the field, and had a Reiki master also send the healing energy towards the Wyrdoscope. And what was interesting there was you saw a build up of the coherence in the field as she did her work. So it feels like, in Dutch you have this expression in the kinderschoenen, which means in the child's shoes. It feels like we're really in the child's shoes, as it were, with this research at the moment, just starting to scratch the surface. But the exciting thing is that we're taking a scientific approach to what up until now, has been dismissed by most scientists. But any open-minded scientist now looking at this kind of data would be curious about what's going on, and it would start to give validity to many of the practices that, say, you're involved in, that many of us are involved in, that we can't really explain and have little evidence for, except subjective or intersubjective evidence. So to be able to start to gather data in this way, I think might just help the Western mind anyway to open up a little bit more to some of the possibilities that many of us would just know are there anyway, but which it would be great to get more into the mainstream and bridge the worlds between science and consciousness. So just a couple of images, like the top one, it's Weird Experience. If you do happen to be in the UK and are ever up north in Yorkshire, then do visit us at Broughton. If you call in advance, somebody could give you a tour of Weird Experience, where we have all the equipment from the Princeton lab, as well as their whole library of books, many of which you can't get anymore, are out of print, plus lots of journals going back to the 1970s, publications, including my favorite, which is the 1974 report from the first meeting of the Soviet and American psychic researchers into what they called psychotronics back then. And all the papers that they all submitted are in this document that was stamped for government use only, but obviously has since been released and found its way to the Princeton Library. So this, absolutely fascinating work. So if you're ever there, do feel free to get in touch and drop in. You can have a go with Murphy, who is this great big machine you can see standing behind Lynn McTaggart there. That's Wolf on the right, who is our scientist, and then Brenda Dunn next to Lynn, who was the psychologist at the Princeton lab, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. Actually passed away a few months after we established Weird Experience, awarded her a PhD, and named a room after her. And her son, Jeff, said she just felt she was done. The work was continuing. She'd been honored for her contribution, and she was ready to move on to the next stage. So, yeah, do drop in. I will show you now the Wyrdoscope and a couple of the features, just for a little more, so you have a bit more idea of what the device is and the size. So this is the size of it. It can be plugged in. Has a rechargeable battery in, so it can run for like 6 hours standalone. So taking it out into sacred sites and things, it's really good for that, because you don't have to plug it in. Obviously, has a couple of buttons, which is also an innovation on the Princeton work. This one, if you press this button, it stamps an event into the data stream. So let's say you were doing some kind of intervention, Feng Shui intervention, and you press the button, then you would be able to see back in the data when exactly you made that intervention, and see whether there was a response in the field as well. It also has a microphone here, so you can make a comment. You could push it down and say, okay, I'm just doing this intervention at the moment, it'll last 10 minutes or something. And as you are scrolling through the data, you'll hear the audio file, so you'll know exactly what was happening and be able to see the shifts in the field at the same time as listening to the audio. Or you could even record the whole event, as it were, and then as you listen back to the recording, you'd be able to obviously see what's going on in the field. We've had somebody take it out to an event with the Dalai Lama, track what's going on there. as well as the football research. The Harvard Medical School are now getting hold of one because they're researching the wellness effects of Sadhguru's practices, and he's doing a big ritual out in Tennessee, and they want to see how that ritual affects the field. Obviously, Monroe Institute, these kind of folks are very curious about it. And the nice feedback we're getting from people like Dean Radin and others who are in this field of parapsychology is that not much has evolved in that field over the last 10 years. And they're saying that this seems to be the first real development in the field, both the device, the hardware device, but also the analytical software, which enables anybody, doesn't have to be a scientist, to be able to take the data, drop it into the software and see the patterns and the correlations with what was actually going on in the room or the space at the time. So I think that's probably enough for now. And maybe we can just open it up, Gina, and see if there's any questions or comments.
Yes. Let's see now. I'm just going to spotlight something, and I can talk to you and see if Diana has a question.
Yes, well, Jody puts a question in here. It says, is this something similar to quantum physics where the observer affects the experiments? Yeah, very much, Jody. It's really about entanglement. So it's the user of the device consciously connects it to the event that it's tracking, and that helps to create an entanglement between the device and the event that's going on. Obviously, if it's in the physical space, that helps to connect it a lot more. And one of the interesting things that they found in the Princeton research was that the people who had the biggest effect on the devices were couples in love. And the reason for that would be the fact that it's a combination of intention, which is the information that you send to the field, and attention, which is more the heart-based energy that amplifies the effect. And obviously the masculine archetypally is the mind and the feminine archetypally is the heart. And what they found was that men were better at getting the line to move in the direction they wanted, but with relatively small effects. And women were better at getting bigger effects, but not necessarily in the direction that they intended. So when you can actually get this integration of heart and mind, and therefore if you have a kind of man and a woman in love, as it were, and they do both, then this was obviously what generated the biggest effect in the field. But that's the you entangle yourself, to take the quantum physics term, with the device, and that's what's and then like they say, like in quantum physics, when these two particles are entangled, when you change one, the other changes instantly. There's no time, that passes between them. And so what's happening is that as you intend something, or as the group has an effect, or as you do your Feng Shui intervention, at the same time, the field is responding and the device is responding to what you're doing.
It does show the power of the people in the place, and really you demonstrated it, whether intentionally or not. The first morning we had the first summit when Brenda came, because all this equipment had been stored, and you brought it all over to Broughton and got this established, and it reawakened retired research in a sense, because as Bob said, you take it and make of it what you will. And she shared her story, and we were all with her. Literally, we were hanging on every word. And then you came along and you awarded her a PhD from Ubiquity University. And even now I've got goosebumps. And the machine went poof later on when we saw it. It was such an emotional moment, because we were listening to her life story, that she was in charge of all these PhDs, and yet she did not have one herself. And she was a superlative, person in this field. And you recognized her. And in that moment, I think everybody was it was just a peak of emotion, and the machine got it. Absolutely.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
fantastic. Yeah.
So there's a couple of
Diana's got a question, so ask to unmute. Yep, go for it, Diana.
Okay, thank you. That the machines are not physically attached, so they're just placed in the room. And in the case of measuring a group's reaction, I can fully understand it. When you talk about the death, it's one person. You would have other people in the room. How do you know there's nobody else in the room except for the dog?
There doesn't have to be. Yeah, the dog left early.
Yeah.
But the way the scientists describe it is what they call, it's about detecting organizational closure. So it's when you have, you know, if you do a ritual or something, you start with, you open it and you close it, right? So it's bounded in time and space. And if you're doing energy work, you know, you're looking at what's the space we're working in, and you may put a time parameter on it. How long do we want the effect to last, or whatever? So in a life, a human life, of the amount of time that a soul inhabits a body, one could think of as a closure. And so the moment that the closure ends, you know, something, that's what I think we think, right? This is all speculative, of course, Diana, because we have no idea really, but that's what we imagine is going on, that something, the break, as it were, between the soul and the body, at that point, that's registering something in the field.
So if there's a nurse in the room together with the patient, however, the machine is just measuring that point. I mean, when the soul leaves the body, it doesn't matter that there's somebody else, because they're basically on an even keel anyway.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have the measurements they have picked up the same measurements when there aren't people in the room. If there were people in the room, and you know, the EEG kind of flatlines or whatever, and everybody, you know, is emotional,
Yeah,
then you'd expect that to add to the effect, of course. But we've got enough results now that show, you know, even with nobody in the room and with nobody actually knowing, you know, that it happened. And then you can get into lots of complicated debates, you know, when time is nonlinear, that maybe when people do hear a few hours later, there's a big emotional response, and that has a retrocausal effect, you know. But that's all, it's all experiment that we need to kind of do to find out. There's a couple of, can I pick up on a couple of them in the chat?
Yes, do that.
So J.E. Hardy saying, is there a repository? Yeah, so what happens is you export the data from the Wyrdoscope using your laptop and a local Wi-Fi connection between the Wyrdoscope and your laptop. You can just export it and analyze it yourself if you're a real data geek and are into all of that kind of stuff, or you can import it into the software program that we have. And then what you can do is on the website. It's interesting you asked that, actually, because we're just creating, and then the tech guy was just showing it to me today, a place where you can upload your data and share it with others. And, you know, people can have a conversation about, okay, when I did this, this is what I picked up. What did you pick up? You know, so the ability to actually share the data with each other and the kinds of interventions that people were doing is definitely something we're working on. It's really, you know, building a community of people who are interested in tracking some of the work in this area.
Jodie's asking about, you know, an intervention. Well, you know, consultations are all different, but there's a call to the consultant. There's a conversation about what the issue might be. And then I think setting intentions, let's focus on, and then a review of the space, and then on the spot, adjustments can be made. And as we talk, the more power you put into it, if you then say, let's really, I mean, you could even do a meditation, but everybody will have a different style. But there's a moment when you decide that you'll do something, there's an agreement. And something may be done as, you know, you might be asking somebody to redecorate or something that can't be done immediately. But there are things that you can do immediately. And you might symbolically, example, put a crystal in a window or place something and then say that is for. So you're kind of giving it emotive energy, you're setting an intention, you're doing it, the client and the practitioner, you're focusing on something. And as you say, Peter, the more you do this, the more you see, if I do it this way, I get a more significant response. So when the question is here about has it been done with or without flying stars, nobody's really tried it yet in the Feng Shui community. And that's what you're looking, you know, that we're looking to create here, a community of people who might like to start working with their clients in spaces, different spaces, trying things out, documenting and being part of this research and building a new body of knowledge, that which in a sense, you know, you have a Feng Shui consultation, it's kind of trust, isn't it? It's trust. Then you see something happen and you say, hopefully it was because of some of the changes we made. But yeah, Peter, what are you thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not an expert in Feng Shui, so I don't know about the kinds of interventions and things that you make. But I assume that any intervention that you do make, you're wanting the space to have a better quality afterwards than it did before. So that kind of a change you should be able to pick up on the device, because a more coherent, we've shown a more coherent space shows a different pattern in the data than just the kind of a random space. So if it's set with intention, as Gina was saying, and certain interventions change the flow of energy in the space, then you'd expect the device to register that. But we've never done that research. I mean, as I say, we have looked at the different energies in different qualities of space and seen differences there. But it would be very interesting to see whether the kind of Feng Shui work actually has an effect.
And also energy clearing geopathic stress, going in there with earth acupuncture, clearing it away, even if it takes a while to settle. There's space clearing going around and doing space clearing, like we talked about rituals. Jodie asked that question. She's got a hand up. So let's bring Jodie, unmute, and go ahead and ask if you want to do that. Jodie?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, can you hear me? Yeah.
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Yeah.
That's okay. It's 4:45 a.m. here, so I'm not showing my face.
Fair enough, Jodie. Thanks for joining.
Wow. Where are you? New Zealand?
Australia.
Australia. Okay.
Yeah. In flying stars, we calculate 9 stars basically, and in a house that is an objective observation of chi in different rooms of a house. So it's not so much about intervention necessarily. What I was asking is more like a house has a set pattern, and it would be interesting to use the machine to check what that pattern is, and if there's any correlations between what we're seeing, what we're observing in the flying stars chart with the experiment.
Yeah. Many ways of reading a space, and again, that's a case of it's the experiment, isn't it? It's try and see using this machinery, which we know registers changes and shifts in energy, and see whether you get a response. So yes, that is something to potentially to look at. Yeah, Jodie, well done for getting up so early.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to invite Amanda in now. Amanda.
Hi. Just to get clear, and there may not be a definite answer to this, but I'm just kind of wondering, from what you're saying, I get the impression that the purpose, as you're seeing it at the moment anyway, is for research, to be able to get a sense of, as you say, what the effects are from the work that we're doing. But I'm just wondering, sort of open-ended question, I suppose, but the extent to which one could perhaps involve the client in the process, but they wouldn't see the result immediately. Because I thought it might be nice for the client, for you could actually say to the client, look, this is what happened to the energy when we did X, Y, Z, or when we set that intention or whatever. But they wouldn't be able to see that at the time. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, absolutely, you can do that. At the moment, you would then, when you'd finish, you'd go home and you'd export the data and you'd kind of print it. You could print out and write a little report for them and say, okay, when I did this, this is what happened. You could have that done within a couple of hours. What we will have probably by the end of this year is the ability to display the data real time. So there's a HDMI output, so you'll be able to plug a screen in. Potentially you could have it in the space with a screen, seeing the effect that you're having live, as it were, while you're doing any work that you're doing. But that's as I say, a few months out yet. But
fair enough. Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
I think anything that we can show clients convincingly that something is happening, there's a way of showing them that in the invisible world which we're working with, that we can have an effect, that we can make changes, and we can show it's evidence. It's just building up this body of knowledge to show that something's going on. And here, look at the data, and then it's even more compelling. It builds belief. The more we can share that. So people asking the cost, obviously, of this new technology and
the cost at the moment. So we're in the kind of second iteration. The cost at the moment is £1,495. which is just above what it costs us to make. We've got a few more in stock at that price, and then we're going to put it up to 19.95 so that we have a bit of a margin on it and can continue doing the development. So that'll probably be end of, well, probably mid-July or so. But anyway, there's about 4 or 5 left in stock at the moment of the second version. So if anybody is interested, feel free. There's more information if you want more of the specs and things on the link I put in the chat. We don't enable people to just buy it off the website, because part of what we're trying to do, particularly in the early days, is build a community of researchers. We don't want people just to buy it and disappear and then us not to have any contact or communication with them. So if you are interested, drop us an email and say something about what you want to use it for, and then we can certainly arrange it. Yeah. Anyone in Australia? Not at the moment, Jody.
There you go. There's your opportunity. So I put Ubiquity University webpage on. I couldn't immediately get the Science and Consciousness page. Are there any places left there? Have you sold out this year for people who are interested?
There are a few places left. So Science and Consciousness, as I said, as Gina said, I think this year we're focused on a weird space, as we call it. So that's why, and we're also going, Gina's going to also run a session around Feng Shui. We have, it was about, maybe 10 spaces or something left now for it, but it's at a beautiful location. I'll put the direct link in the chat, at Broughton, where we also have all the Princeton equipment. So if you come, you're also able to kind of engage with the original Princeton equipment and hang out in the library if you're into that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it'd be lovely to, have people there. The other users of the Wyrdoscope, people who've already taken it into the world and gathered data, they'll be there and they'll be sharing some of their results, including the football stadium results, which I'm really curious about. So yeah.
It's building, isn't it? It's building, it's new. And I mean, what we're doing is we're bringing vocabulary, language to a field where sometimes it's difficult to speak about and to, I won't use the word convince, but to win other people over. But there's so much that can be shared that is, as you say, you're curious. And it's very compelling. You just look at the data, it's very compelling. So the idea here was to introduce this concept to you. It could be that some of you would be interested in purchasing one of these and being, some of the early people using it, trying it out in your practice and being involved in giving feedback so that we have this body of knowledge expanding. We have it, with the Tantra rituals and the different sacred locations with the death. It's very powerful to see that something as powerful as a passing spirit is actually registered on the machine. Quite profound. And so, this is what we're doing. We're making weird normal.
And Michael, Amanda actually asks, what does WYRD stand for? Great question.
Oh, yeah, go for it,
Amanda. Yeah. So WYRD, W-Y-R-D, was the original Anglo-Saxon Viking word for the interconnected web that generates all life. And the reason we know that is because there was a document that was discovered in the British Library that was written by one of the first monks to come to the British Isles, who was sent out by the abbot to find out what this magic stuff was that the pagans were up to. Like, what were they doing? And of course, the local sorcerer knew that the guy was coming, that the monk was coming. So he prepared a whole initiation process for this monk. And the monk went through this process, got initiated as a sorcerer, and then went back to the monastery and wrote down the story of what happened, documented it. That ended up in the British Library. And then a researcher from Sussex called Brian Bates discovered this document and ended up turning it into a book, a kind of fictional book, but based on this true story. And he called it The Way of Wyrd, W-Y-R-D, because in the document, they used the word weird to describe the invisible world that, the sorcerer or the shaman would go into to heal people or to get a sense of the future, and that kind of thing. So it obviously meant it was a part of normal reality for people back then, you know, to have the sorcerer who would do that work, or the healer who would do that work. But then, of course, once the church came in and all the pagan stuff was not allowed anymore, then that all got pushed underground. As we know, many of the witches were burnt at that time. And then weird, of course, was then corrupted to mean strange, whereas actually it never originally meant strange. It actually meant, you know, this interconnected web, which we then, luckily, the East managed to keep their concepts alive, you know. So we managed it. We imported Qi and the Tao and all these kind of things, which is basically what weird is about. And so part of our mission is to reawaken this meme of weird and reclaim its meaning as the indigenous Northwest European term for, you know, what otherwise we might borrow from the East and call Qi or the Tao. So we're trying to make it cool and fun. So we have T-shirts with like weirdo on it, or, you know, proud to be weird, or like Gina said, making weird the norm. There's a lot you can do with it to play with it. We have a T-shirt inspired by Rupert Sheldrake's work, which says, "Make me look, stare here." You know, his work about like the act of being right.
Looked at.
Yeah. So I think there's a direct link. Maybe I can put that into to where you can buy all these kind of weird merch.
So I think a couple of more points and questions. Hardy was asking about sharing data, and that's if I'm right in saying.
Yeah, I did answer that one. Yeah, that is going to be possible.
Yeah.
We're just kind of doing that, getting that sorted out at the moment.
He's asking about crop circles. Well, you know.
Well, yeah, you'd expect, you know, definitely some significant effects in.
And you can't do the before, can you? Because you don't know where it's going to crop up.
Unless
unintended, but you don't know where it's going to happen. So it's only the after, but there could be a difference in the energy of the space. And then because this is involving software, is there any additional cost for that?
Yeah, the software is you basically get a license for the software. At the moment, it's 99. It's going to go up to 199 because we're just about to release the 1.0 version. So we've been, you know, building the prototypes up until now. But yeah, that's a license which you can get an individual license, or you can get one for, you know, 5 or 10 people.
Yeah. Crop circles.
Me is asking per year or month. No, it's just, you know, for as long as you want to use it, and for upgrades of that version. So until, you know, we do a major upgrade or something, then the license will allow you to keep using it for as long as you want.
Diana's got a hand up.
Yeah, no, you were talking about with the wizards and all that sort of stuff. And in the Kalahari, they still have this ability of knowing that somebody is going to arrive before the people perhaps even know that themselves. I mean, somebody from outside, and they come up to the meeting point, and the person who's arriving has absolutely, you know, whatever. In any case, there's a full story. Have you ever thought of trying to go to Africa or in measuring that? I mean, it's a long way away, I know.
I would love to, Dan. I mean, it's not thought about it myself, but you know, we've got people taking it all over the place. Someone took it into the pyramids, you know, recently in Egypt. So the more people who have them, you know, they're very portable. You do have to take them in hand luggage, but you know, it's not too big because it's got a battery in it, and it's a microprocessor and stuff, a little Raspberry Pi computer. But yeah, people are taking it everywhere. And what we want to do is, you know, it can become a fun thing, like share the photos of, you know, your Wyrdoscope at different locations, and share the data and the stories. And that, it's obviously, that's kind of interesting research, but it builds a field, you know, which starts to get the story out there. Because I mean, the reason that I'm putting time and effort into this is because I think the main reason we're in such a mess as humanity is that we've forgotten the nature of our interconnectedness. You know, we've forgotten we're connected with each other, we're connected with the earth. I mean, we've forgotten we're the earth, which is a really stupid thing to do, and imagine that we're separate from it. So part of the mission, well, really the core mission of Weird Experience and the technologies is to remind people of the nature of our interconnectedness. And then as they kind of see this stuff happening, they're likely to go, well, one, how on earth is this happening, and why didn't I learn about it at school? So we had last week, we had 8 CEOs from the Yorkshire region come into Weird Experience. One of them was a Cambridge physics graduate, and he was like, why hadn't I heard of this before? But he completely got it. He wasn't, at the beginning, he was obviously positively skeptical, but he completely got it. And he was so surprised that he'd never heard about it, disappointed, that he hadn't heard about it before people were being taught it. So that's part of it. And then people are going to start going, well, how do you increase your effect? And that's getting out of your rational mind, having to do the inner work and go inside. So it's a kind of Trojan horse to, well, and so we're going to, one of the next things we're doing is we're developing a lamp that you'll be able to put in a group. And as the group becomes more coherent, the lamp will start to glow. And as they become less coherent, it'll kind of dim down. So it's what I'm calling socio-feedback. You have biofeedback on the body. Well, this is feedback on your collective field, and so again, you're going to have people going, oh, well, what did we just do that made us lose our coherence? Or what did we do that enhanced it? So there'll be a whole inquiry, but then you've got a feedback loop. And then we've got loads of ideas, by the way, but one of the other ones, which is so exciting, is toys for kids, like, to be able to influence this toy moving around the table in certain directions, or have the teddy bear kind of lift its arm and wave at you, just through the power of your mind and heart, because it's the combination of them. And then what I'm looking forward to hearing the stories about are the kids going back to school saying, I've got this bit of consciousness technology, it does this. How does it work? And the teacher kind of going, oh, I'll look that up for you. Because they would never have been taught it themselves. So it's really the technology is a means to an end, and the end is the interconnectedness.
Yeah, great.
And validating for the Western mind.
Yeah, we're coming up to our hour. Yes, I mean we had an amazing event, a couple of months ago, didn't we, at the Weird, in the Weird Room, and we were willing the frog to come towards us, and it did. And then the drum was beating in rhythm to our body. It was absolute. A woman was making the drum beat. It was quite extraordinary. So Skipton, Broughton,
Centre of the universe.
It is the centre, and I live 5 minutes away, so it's just literally over this hill, Broughton. So I'm definitely in the right place at the right time. Peter, thank you. This is great. I think we can send everybody a note, but I've put your email there. If anybody's interested, we've floated out the idea. We think it's going to be interested in the field of Feng Shui, which is what we're all interested in here in this conversation. And if anybody's interested in pursuing this, buying one, registering an interest, asking questions, you've got Peter's address. And over time, we may well build a community of people who get these machines, use them, and you're asking questions now, but off you go. And I think we're beginning an interesting movement. As you say, Peter, we need to reevaluate how we connect as humans, and anything like this that helps us connect with our space, connect with each other is brilliant. So I'm going to thank you on behalf of everybody. And we'll say good night.
Thank you, Gina. Thanks everyone for coming.